The eternal wait for JJK 261 continues, so in the meantime, let me react to some of y'all's theories and answer some of your questions before we hopefully find out everything tonight. So let's get into it, but spoilers beware if you're not caught up on the manga. All right, so to kick things off here, we've got several questions dealing with Gojo, and starting at the top, this one wants to know if I think Shoko could be the other traitor. Now, for reference here, what we're talking about is back during the Shibuya incident when Mekamaru was revealed to be the traitor, they actually thought that there were two traitors, one being somebody that was very high up in the society, due to the information they presumably had, right? And we never found out who that was. So for my money, I think that was Kinjaku, and due to the fact that he is, 1,000-year-old brilliant sorcerer, combined with the fact that he had access to all of Geto's memories, I think he was probably the other person in reference there. But if it was somebody aside from Kinjaku, I still don't think it would have been Shoko, just because I don't think that really makes sense for her character. It would certainly make for an amazing twist, don't get me wrong. But if it wasn't Kinjaku, I would guess that it was more likely one of the higher-ups, one of the people that is now passed away, because all of them were taken out. And it just feels like something that Gege could just leave behind at this point. But yeah, my headcanon has always been that that was Kinjaku. So is this possible? Sure. But I don't think that final panel is Kinjaku. I do think he could come back, but I don't think he would come back this way. I don't think he'll take over Gojo's body, but we'll see. Next we got, could Gojo come back by sacrificing the future use of RCT for one massive burst of healing? And conceptually, as a binding vow, that makes sense to me. I could see something like that being feasible within the rules of JJK, but I don't think this would be how Gojo would come back, just because it would feel pretty underwhelming. I think if there was a binding vow, it would likely involve giving up one of the six eyes or his curse technique, or just something more monumental than that. And obviously, giving up your forever RCT is big, don't get me wrong, but just thematically within the story, it doesn't have that much weight. Next, we have Higuruma, Ghost of the Strongest, which I presume this is asking, do I think it could be Higuruma in that final panel? And no, I don't think so. I think it's Gojo. I don't think it's Yuta Okotsu. I don't think it's Kashimo or Uraume or Nobara or anybody. I think it is Gojo. The question just is it really Gojo, or is there something zany going on? However, I do think Higuruma could come back. I think that, he's not off the table, but I don't think it's him in that final panel. And then next we have another binding vow question for, could he make a binding vow to live with a heavenly restriction? And no, he couldn't. You can't emulate a heavenly restriction with a binding vow. They are kind of this mysterious thing. And yes, they're very similar to binding vows insofar as they operate on equivalent exchange, but an individual person out there couldn't just copy Toji. They couldn't say, I'm going to give up all cursed energy, give me a heavenly restricted body. So I don't think that specifically could be what Gojo would do, but he could use binding vows to help himself come back. And then this final one down here is a Hail Mary theory for today's leaks, saying that whatever's happening in that final panel could be somebody's domain that has to deal with fear. And Sukuna fears seeing Gojo again, so that's what's going on. And I certainly think this is possible. I put out a video talking about potential different domains that could have been at the end. Could it have been Yuji's? Could it have been Toto's, So I could totally see something like that, but I don't necessarily see it being the most likely explanation, but I'm really excited to find out tonight. Next up, we got a couple questions, and I'm actually going to start with the second one here because it's very similar to what I was just talking about, referencing this potential fear to explain that final panel and even comparing it to when Yuji was backing down Mahito in Shibuya with the wolves and everything. So I've actually made a video explaining that moment with Mahito and Yuji because a lot of people wonder, is that Yuji's domain? Is it his innate domain? And I personally don't think so. I think all Gege was doing there was using some symbolic imagery. I don't think that was literally happening in the moment. But, I could be wrong. This could be a full circle moment where Gege is going to point back to that and be like, yes, this was a hint. So certainly possible, but it still wouldn't be my first guess. And then coming up to your first question here about when fighting Jogo, Sukuna hadn't used his domain before using the fire arrow. So I actually have a couple videos talking all about the fire arrow after we learned about it. Sukuna does not have to cast the domain to use the fire arrow. That's just the only way he can use the fire arrow against multiple people. So against Jogo, that's just one person, and it's not Maharaga, so he wasn't pressed to do it the most, right? So against Jogo, he didn't have to do the domain. He can just do the fire arrow. But yeah, again, I would check out those other videos. I go more in depth on explaining kind of the nuance there. Next up, we've got a longer comment dealing with the whole Gojo thing, so let me move out of the way and y'all can pause to read the whole thing if you want. But they're basically saying there's three options in their mind. The first option is Gojo comes back, but he's weaker. The second is Gojo comes back, but he's full power, and so Sukuna is going to have to run or do something crazy. And third, he doesn't come back at all. And I pretty much agree with these. I'm of the mind that Gojo will come back weaker. I've put out a ton of videos about it. I won't bore you guys with it here, but he's coming back to accept that he is not the strongest. That's not his identity. His identity is that he's Gojo. And plus, that would play into the fact if he did have to sacrifice a 6 eyes or something in order to come back, right? He'd be weaker. But I also think if that is Gojo, regardless of whether he's weaker or not, Sukuna's going to have to do something. Whether that's activating the merger or Uruume swooping in, we'll have to see. But yeah, I pretty much agree with your various options here. It'll certainly be one of them. And then speaking of Uruume swooping in, we have this one, which is less of a question, more of just an idea, saying how cool would it be if we got this kind of 5-way battle between Todo, Yuji, and Hikari versus Sukuna and Uruume. And I think that would be amazing. The more people thrown in, I think the more chaotic and cool it could be. Like, I trust Gege to handle that. Plus, I would love to see Hikari getting in on the swaps, right? Or Gojo, if that is him. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to this. And again, if that is Gojo, then they're going to need to do something, right? And the merger seems like a very likely choice to just kind of hit as a big red button, but I expect to see something from Uruume soon, so we'll have to see. Next up, we've got another Gojo theory here asking what if Sukuna broke his binding vow related to the World Slash when he used it on Yuta, and Gojo coming back could be the side effect or the punishment from that. And I certainly think that's a cool angle to play with. I would be interested to see like what that actually meant. If that's how it went down, I don't think it would be Gojo actually coming back, but more so he is just the manifestation of these punishments, and maybe it means Sukuna can't use his domain anymore, which would be poetic since he's doing, Gojo's hand sign, or something along those lines. So if Gojo is more of a hallucination, to put it simply, then I would be cool with like this type of explanation for that. Down here we got a little cross-verse mayhem. They want to know, in a battle between Sukuna at full power but no domain expansion versus the entire Demon Slayer verse at full power, who wins? I don't really know how to like merge the two power systems of those verses, but I think there's a lot of people faster than Sukuna in Demon Slayer, and if he doesn't have his domain, then that combined with the fact that he's literally fighting that many people, I'm going to give it to Demon Slayer. But if we give Sukuna his domain expansion, I'm probably taking him, but I would love to hear y'all's opinions on this, especially those of you that are more well-versed in Demon Slayer. Next up, we got a couple more fun what-ifs here, and the top one up there says, rank the power scaling of sorcerers if they all had Maki and Toji's heavenly restriction. So this is interesting because based on what we know about that heavenly restriction, you're pretty much standard across the board. Now, Maki, once fully realized, obviously, not before then, she was compared to being the next Toji, as if they were equal in stats. So I don't think there would be different physical amps depending on the person. Like, I don't think, Gojo would just by default have a better heavenly restriction in that regard. So I think what it boils down to is like battle IQ and talent. So for my money, if everybody had that, the strongest threats would be Gojo and Sukuna for obvious reasons. They're just built different. But beyond that, Higuruma, since he's a prodigy, and Todo, due to his battle IQ, I think he would just go crazy with it. And then for the second question here, it asks, if all of the sorcerers from all the different eras had a battle royale, which era would come out on top? And I think we can pretty safely boil this down very quickly to Gojo versus Sukuna. It's either going to be the Heian era or the modern era, because those two are just built different, right? And yeah, could there be a theoretical sorcerer out there from a different era that was just as strong as they are? Maybe, but we don't know what we don't know, right? So we got to boil it down to those two. And I'm honestly going to have to give the edge to Sukuna, just due to his selfishness and his ability to probably just go all out more so than Gojo would. I think Gojo would be trying to mitigate the losses of his own allies, and Sukuna's not going to be worried about that, so I gotta go with the king. Next up, Jojo wants to know if I think Sukuna was physically weakened after he transformed into his true form. And really, this is kind of impossible to know. We haven't gotten like metrics on Sukuna's stats every step of the way, but I would imagine it was purely a physical refresh. Basically, like he got his second wind in that regard. But we know his domain was still out, his RCT was still out, so I would imagine his cursed energy output was also handicapped from the Gojo fight, but obviously not to the levels it would be after taking Yuji punches. And then finally here we have a couple of donations relating to our custom curse technique tournament going over in the Discord. The first one here wants to know what kind of video coverage I'll be doing on this tournament, and I'm going to figure it out as we go. I won't be making a video on every round or anything because there are potentially going to be 128 entrants, so this is going to be a big and long tournament. But I will definitely do some check-in videos, and then of course as we get toward the end, I will definitely cover the finals and let you guys know kind of what happened once it's all said and done. But I've got some ideas, so we'll see what happens as this tournament goes. Anyways, y'all, that's all for this one. Thank you to everyone who donated and asked a question. And y'all, we are only mere hours away from 261 leaks. So get in your final predictions and make sure you join the Discord for our leaks party. It should be chaos.